Paul, tell us what you got coming up, my friend.
We've got Tim Pool fresh back from Sweden. Obviously, he went there to investigate the link between mass immigration and crime. Very interesting how he was treated by the media. So we're going to get to that in the second half of the hour. But I was just thinking about the censorship issue, Alex. You know, with this Facebook thing where they're basically banning every second InfoWars post that I make by declaring it spam, I thought it could have been because I was posting it on both my Facebook accounts at the same time because I've got two separate accounts. But then yesterday, Adon wrote the article about the Homeland episode, the season with you in it, with them smearing you as this fake news character. I posted that on my Facebook page. Once, within an hour, it was banned as spam, disappeared from Facebook altogether. So this censorship is really coming down hard.
So they create a fake character where we set up veterans and lie about people and support terrorists. They admit the character is supposed to be me, and we can't respond to it on Facebook. I mean, this is an unprecedented info war.
Totally. Oh, and by the way, that show is a total failure. It used to be good. Now it's, you know, social justice 101. Their ratings are completely collapsing. They falsely predicted that there would be a female president. That never happened. So they're a total joke. They're losing their audience. The other thing I've noticed, Alex, is on YouTube. You know, with social media, you've got Facebook and Twitter. Twitter is kind of a tiny echo chamber of leftists. But what I've noticed on YouTube is that all these major SJW channels, these leftist channels like MTV News, Lacey Green, all these feminists, they're all giving up. They're all just quitting their YouTube channels because we're completely whooping their ass on YouTube.
That's right. And meanwhile, the MTV, Viacom, Sumner Redstone also produces Homeland Against Us, has Snoop Dogg saying kill the president, which is totally illegal. I mean, look, I'm all for free speech. And I should add Craig Sawyer, formerly SEAL Team 6, a lot of other great stuff, great patriot, and a fellow Texan. He's going to be on tomorrow. That's going to be exciting, Paul. But I'm telling you, we're on the march, like well, folks like Drudge have said. Why don't we build our own platforms? We've done it. We know we would get kicked off Facebook and Twitter at a certain point. They're doing it because they're panicking, Paul.
No, precisely. And I mean, I've seen comments from people, you know, leftist SJWs who admit they've taken over YouTube. The far right has taken over YouTube. And it's not the far right. It's just anyone with a shred of common sense. But it's true. All the top YouTubers, down to people like JonTron and PewDiePie, and people like Philip DeFranco, they've got millions and millions of subscribers. They've been red-pilled. They're gradually coming out with a similar message to us. And now the establishment is in a blind panic. That's why they went after PewDiePie with these smears.
That's right. They're totally panicking. You're taking over right after the break. Thank you, Paul Joseph Watson. We still have our own platform, our affiliates across the country. We're kicking their ass, so they want to just kick us off the playing field. Totally un-American. And their whole little Islamic worship fest that's happening in Europe. They want $53 million fines for anybody that basically posts news against the globalist in Germany. It's not going to work. That's in the Associated Press, folks. So they now admit the censorship. They admit the communist Chinese are advising on it. Good luck selling that because you plan to do all this with Hillary in, but you didn't get the witch in. Paul Watson's coming up.
We're live. It's the 4th hour of the Alex Jones Show on this Tuesday edition. Breaking news out of France. Bomb threat at central Montpellier Square. Huge police presence. This is the new normal in Europe, thanks to the religion of peace. And what about Sweden? What happened last night in Sweden? What happens every night in Sweden? What happens every day in Sweden? Possible explosives in 4 different locations in Sweden. 1 in Tarnas, 3 in Norrbotten. That's out of Expressen, a Swedish newspaper. So this is basically a daily basis now. Grenade attacks, stabbings, shootings, you name it. It's happening in Sweden because the cultural enrichment is intensifying. And we have an award-winning journalist coming on at the bottom of the hour to talk about his experiences in Sweden, in some of these migrant suburbs, his reaction, or the Swedish media's reaction to him, for simply daring to investigate the issue. They weren't happy about it, and they let him know. There's a top story up on Infowars.com right now. Iraqi soldier, ISIS would conquer Sweden in a few hours. According to an Iraqi soldier fighting against the Islamic State in Mosul, ISIS would be able to conquer Sweden in a few hours. Now, this account was told to a war correspondent working for Expressen, the Swedish newspaper. She's been there for basically weeks or months covering this bombardment against ISIS in Mosul. She had a conversation with an Iraqi soldier who is also fighting against ISIS, trying to reclaim his own country. She told him basically that now Sweden, some areas of Sweden, some cities in Sweden are offering returning ISIS jihadists employment, housing, education, and financial welfare in an effort to reintegrate them into society. That's right. There's no discussion of the absolute lunacy of allowing ISIS terrorists back into your country in the first place. No, we don't talk about that because we're progressive, we're liberal. They're actually giving them welfare and benefits when they come back into the country, with them having, beheaded God knows how many people over in Syria and Iraq. So basically, this war correspondent working for this newspaper told an Iraqi soldier who was completely unaware of this, he's actually fighting against ISIS, that this was taking place. He risked his life to fight ISIS, as she said. And basically, he had tears in his eyes, according to this journalist, and went on to say when she asked him how long it would take ISIS to conquer Sweden, he said, quote, "Not days, hours, in a few hours." And that's probably true because they'd be welcomed with open arms by most of the leftists in Sweden. Stockholm Syndrome, it's called that for a reason now. But what's interesting about this article is in the same report from this war correspondent, she goes through some of the examples of how jihadists from Sweden went over to fight for ISIS and how they were involved in terrorist attacks. Now, we know that Sweden is a hotbed for ISIS, for Islamist jihadists. It's routinely in the top 3 European countries in terms of the ones who export the most fighters over to Syria. And she talks about a few individuals that came from Syria. For example, Osama Krayan. This is an individual born in Malmö, Sweden in 1992. Again, Malmö's completely safe, according to the left. It's a liberal, multicultural utopia. Born in Sweden in 1992, he went to Syria to fight for ISIS in 2014, returned to Europe posing as a refugee on a false passport. He then went on to meet with Salah Abdeslam. You might have heard of that name before. He was one of the Paris massacre culprits, mowing down people in the street. That's the guy who this Swede, native Swede, met with, obviously from Syrian descent. So he helped coordinate the Paris massacre. He was also involved in planning the Brussels bombing, which happened just 4 months later. In fact, he was intended to be the second metro bomber, but backed out at the last minute. This is who Sweden is producing in their liberal, multicultural Islamic ghettos. That's just one of them. Ironically, this same individual, Osama Krayan, participated in a documentary years before called Without Borders, which was about how to succeed with integration of migrants into Swedish society. He goes on to become a member of ISIS and helps coordinate the Paris massacre and the Brussels airport and metro bombing. That's how good multiculturalism is working in Sweden. But wait, there's more. The war correspondent also talks about an individual called Mohamed Belkade, a 35-year-old Algerian who emigrated to and lived for several years in Sweden. Belkade was killed by Belgian police during the raid that led to the capture of Salah Abdeslam, whom he was associated with. 2 other suspects who escaped the raid, Ibrahim and Khalid al-Bakroui, went on to carry out the Brussels bombing a week later. So just 2 individuals there. She goes on to name more, again, out of the radicalized jihadist ghettos in Sweden, posing as refugees, slipping in and out of all these different countries, going on to coordinate the Paris massacre and the Brussels bombing. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about these massive problems being created by just letting in hundreds of thousands of people. Of course, it only takes 1% for there to be massive issues with that. And the polls show that 21% of Syrians support ISIS to begin with. So it's an absolute horror show what's taking place, the risk that we're putting ourselves under in all these different European countries. But Sweden has now moved to muzzle its cops to uphold political correctness. This is out of Sputnik. Now, of course, Peter Springer, the veteran Swedish policeman, went public with his concerns, probably about 6 weeks ago now. You remember the Facebook post in which he listed the names of the people committing serious violent crimes in Sweden. Mohammed. Almost everyone was called Mohammed. Some were spelled differently. He went public. Massive support from the Swedish people. Again, he's got 250,000 likes on his Facebook page in just that 6 weeks alone, from a country with basically a tiny population. How did the Swedish authorities respond to this? Did they acknowledge, given the fact that 250,000 people have liked his Facebook page, that this is an issue that Swedes are seriously concerned about and there needs to be a national conversation about it? No. They basically said he was a racist, put him under investigation. Now they're telling other police officers, don't you dare release any information in a similar manner to how he did, otherwise you will be vehemently punished. So again, it's all about the cover-up. It's about upholding political correctness while their society is torn apart. Every single day, and you can see it on my Twitter account, it's grenade attacks, bombings, stabbings, people being gunned down. That's not normal for a country like Sweden. That may be normal for Chicago. That has never been normal for a country like Sweden up until the past 5, 6, 7 years, especially since 2014. So we're going to get into that with Tim Pool later on in the show. Of course, when he went to Malmo, he didn't really see much action. Nothing was going on. The Swedish media loved him. Then he actually went to a no-go area, was basically told to leave by the police, otherwise there'd be a riot. Then their attitude kind of turned against him, didn't it? To the point where a report that came out a few days ago in Swedish mainstream media called him a threat to democracy or a danger to democracy. So an independent, impartial journalist traveling to a Western, supposedly free, liberalized country to report impartially on the facts, to talk to public officials, to talk to residents, he's labeled a danger to democracy simply for doing journalism. What does that say about the attitude in Sweden? Absolutely insane. So we're going to get to that at the bottom of the hour. Talked about the censorship that was going on earlier. That happened again today on Facebook. We had the article up on Drudge Report, Infowars.com article, Marine Le Pen smacks down reporter, no one trusts the media. It's an interview of the leading French presidential candidate, Marine Le Pen, with a reporter. That's not spam. That's not fake news. What did Facebook classify it as? Spam. Once again, spam. It's completely invisible when I post it on my Facebook page. Now, again, I was wondering what was the cause. Was it something I was doing wrong to violate their terms of agreement? Well, no, because again, I posted Adon Salazar's article yesterday about the Homeland episode, which smears Alex Jones. That was labeled spam. That was censored. That was memory hold. So this is only going to intensify, given that Facebook is now being threatened directly by German government officials that they're going to be fined $53 million if they fail to remove illegal content such as hate speech or defamatory fake news within 7 days. And you know what that is, don't you? Because we've had stories of people getting home visits from the German police if they criticize their own government's migrant policy. These things are always expanded out. Look at the fake news lists that Harvard University came out with a few days ago. The fake news list, the misleading websites. Every single major conservative website was on this list. It's blatantly a ploy to take the problem of fake news, which is a tiny problem. Stanford University study found fake news had no impact on the outcome of the US presidential election. So it's a tiny problem. Yes, some people are making ill-gotten advertising gains off fake news, deliberately put out fake. They know it's deceptive. So they took that problem, which wasn't a massive problem, then just transposed it onto conservative media and basically said, anyone who disagrees with our leftist narrative, that's fake news. Ban it, censor it, get it off the internet, because they can't compete with us on a level playing field. So they have to cheat. They have to resort to dirty tricks, but we will not be silenced. We'll be back in the next segment of the Alex Jones Show. Breaking news at Infowars.com. We're live on the Alex Jones Show. Coming up in the next segment will be our guest, Tim Pool. For the moment, we're going to go to more news. Of course, the Netherlands has a big election tomorrow. This is out of Bloomberg.com. Wilders' party slumps in the final Dutch polls on election eve. This is, of course, the populist Geert Wilders. They had this big confrontation with Turkey over the weekend, over the past few days. It looks as if, according to these polls, and we know that polls are always accurate, aren't they? It looks as if that might have benefited the Conservative Party in Holland to the detriment of Geert Wilders, given that they did kind of stand up to Turkey's authoritarian bullying. The prospect of Geert Wilders emerging as the winner of Wednesday's Dutch election was thrown into doubt by two polls on the eve of voting that showed his anti-Islam, anti-European Freedom Party slumping to fifth place in one survey and third in another. The final poll showed Wilders' party on 16 seats in the 150-member lower house of parliament. So it looks like, according to these polls, he's not going to do as well as expected. Of course, we know from previous polls that they normally turn out to be completely wrong. Sometimes you have this phenomenon of people refusing to acknowledge that they're going to vote for, quote, controversial populist parties and actually doing so on the day. That happened with Brexit. So we'll see if that turns out. The election in the Netherlands is tomorrow. On a similar subject, Zero Hedge reports Turkey says migrant deal has ended, may unleash millions of refugees. Now, isn't it interesting that Turkey and Erdogan is basically using this refugee army as a threat? They see these migrants, these refugees, as a kind of invading army that they can unleash on Europe if they don't get their way, if they don't get their payoff. What does that tell you about the entire refugee migrant issue? It tells you that they know that these people cause massive problems in Western societies. They increase the terror threat. And Zero Hedge reports the most troubling development, and one which has the potential to sway the outcome of the Dutch election, is that in the final power play aimed towards Merkel, Kurtulmuş, who is the Turkish deputy prime minister, exclaimed that since Europe has not kept its promises on the migrant deal, for us, that agreement has ended. So, of course, Turkey agreed to hold back the migrant wave because it's so beneficial and culturally enriching that Germany and other countries are having to pay Turkey tens of millions of euros simply to stop them from unleashing the wave. Now they're saying that that agreement has ended, given what has happened in the Netherlands over the past few days. The article goes on to state, which means that 1 year after it collected $3 billion for the migrant deal, Turkey has just voided the agreement, and the next step would be that Turkey is about to flood Europe with refugees currently held inside Turkish borders. They estimate Turkey currently harbors over 2 million potential migrants. Europe's refugee situation is about to get far worse, and support for anti-immigrant political organizations across the continent is about to take another step higher. So Turkey is basically saying, if you don't agree to these demands that we can basically hold campaign rallies in the Netherlands, in these different European cities. They've got newspapers bragging about how, for example, there are 400,000 Turks living in Holland, and Holland only has a 48,000-man army. What's the implication of that? So again, Erdogan wants to have his rallies in these European cities, even though he doesn't allow political rallies against him in his own country because he's an authoritarian dictator. But the Netherlands stood up to that. They said, we're not going to allow that. They started arresting and basically deporting diplomats and officials from Turkey. Turkey is not happy with that. They've now said the agreement has been voided and are threatening to unleash this migrant wave. This is serious. This is an extremely serious moment that we need to watch, and we'll see how it plays out in the Dutch election tomorrow. Again, it could play into the hands of the Conservative Party and against Geert Wilders, because they did, in a sense, stand up to the Turkish government. Not really on the streets. If you watch the footage, which I posted yesterday, where you have these hundreds of Islamist Turks chanting Allah Akbar, blocking traffic, banging on windows of buses in Amsterdam, and again, the police are nowhere to be seen. So what is going to happen with those 2 million refugees? Will Turkey unleash them if they don't get their own way? Daily Caller is reporting Assange, Hillary intelligence officials are quietly plotting a Pence takeover. We've warned all along that the Trump administration is still riddled with globalists. You look at his foreign advisors, foreign policy advisors, half of them are CFR members, half of them are globalists. Now Julian Assange is warning that Pence, maybe he doesn't even know it, but the neocons, the deep state, lining up behind Pence, they're still desperate to sabotage, to unseat Donald Trump. We'll be back on the Alex Jones Show live, Infowars.com.